To Modern Lifekeeping. I am your host, Lori Christine. Today we have a special guest, Sarah Sherman. She's here from New Brunswick, Canada, to share with us ways in which she's healed from trauma. Her message is, you are not your story. Welcome, Sarah. Thank you for joining us today. We can't wait to hear all about your story.
Thank you, Lori. I'm really glad to be here today. I've been listening to your podcasts and really enjoying them. And so I'm very honored to be presenting today. I thought perhaps I can tell you a little bit about my story, if that works. I lived for a very long time in an abusive relationship, and it was a bit of, well, people didn't know I was in an abusive relationship. I presented well. I worked in social services and in government. I was in charge of a lot of things, and I helped other people all the time. And I was always helping women who were in abusive relationships. So I hid it very well. And then one day it came to a head. And when that happened, after the final assault, I ended up in the emergency room in my hospital. My child was being medevaced by helicopter to the nearest children's hospital trauma center. And I was seeing the sexual assault nurse examiner, which we now call forensic nurse examiners. And as part of that, I discovered what women go through, after they've experienced such a violent crime. And I decided many years later, when I was healed and I knew that I could present in a way that was from healing, not victim, and I could support other people. And my children were old enough and happy that I could talk about it now. They didn't want me to when they were younger, and so that was okay. But it was time to help other people. And so after 18 years of an abusive relationship and then 17 years of healing, here I am.
Nice. Oh, we're so glad to have you here.
Thank you.
So that insight really helped you to empathize with where the people are that are experiencing trauma?
Yes, it did. I discovered, you know, I felt like I had known about what people were going through with trauma. My mom had been a foster parent for 30 years. I had been going through some social work programming. I worked in social services. I thought I knew. But, when it's yourself, it's different. And I realized that there was some big gaps in the system. And so when I was at the hospital, well, sorry, let me go back a little bit. And I don't mean to be disruptive, but I'm going to go back a little bit to the fact that a lot of what I'm doing now is education and awareness. And I work with first responders, the nurses, the police, and others who work with victims when they're being picked up and taken for help. And being that I live in a rural country with small hospitals, people know each other. What I talk to police about is other ways to take people to the hospital than driving them to the front door. I was brought to the front door. I thought that the perpetrator was inside the hospital. I was terrified to enter. I only had on 2 items of clothing, a pajama top, bottom, no shoes, nothing. It was November. And so by the time I went through this whole process and we're finished, and it's a very long process to be examined for sexual assault, and nobody can come or go out of a room. So there's a lot that entails. I was very lucky to have a victim support service worker with me, and she held my hand through it all. I do recommend people do that. Don't take a friend or family unless that's all you have, because it's not something that they need to remember or that you need to think about them remembering. It's better to have somebody unbiased who has the ability to work with you. So when I left and I first walked in the cold with nothing on my feet, had to ask the officer to go get me something to put on my feet. They didn't think about those things. Not that they treated me badly, they just weren't thinking. And so I try to help them think about those steps that might be missing that the victim, which I was at the time, feels. And when I was finished, I got paper maternity underwear. I got no bra, and I definitely needed one at the time. I was given clothes that were ill-fitting, too small, and bright pink neon. And when I left, and no shoes, still paper booties. When I left, I felt almost re-victimized again because I felt like
Sure.
everybody was looking at me. I came up in a police car. Did I commit a crime? I looked horrible when I left, even worse than when I went in, if you can believe that. And so what I've done is I've created a process where we provide patients in our hospitals, and we're expanding this federally, but where we provide them with comfort kits so that they can, after that, because of course you can't eat or drink anything while you're waiting for the exam. You can't clean up, everything's evidence. And so we give them packets with all the toiletries, soap, shampoo, toothbrushes, everything, hairbrush. And so they can go have a shower at the hospital and
Mm,
they can select their own clothing that will let them feel invisible, let them feel like they blend into a crowd. They're not standing out in any way. We give them bags, like the hospital reusable, the grocery shopping reusable kind of Walmart type bags that everybody has nowadays. So nobody thinks anything when you see that versus the big, I don't know how yours are in the US, but ours are big, giant white plastic with blue stripes, and everybody knows you, but your name's all over it. Horrible. Um, and then we make sure they have some kind of footwear. And then we give them gift cards. So because everybody has to drive, we don't have public transit very much. And so everybody's had to drive, and gas is very expensive. And how did they even get here? So we make sure that they have what they need to have a meal, buy groceries if they need to for their family, get to the next place. We do not require they report to the police. That is totally their choice. We help every single person who comes through. We help, of course, mainly women and girls, but there's young men, there's
sure.
older men, it's intimate partner violence and sexual assault. And that's what we do. And we're
Oh,
creating a nonprofit so that we can provide those services. And it's been very well received. It's the nurses are glad because, as we all know, in all of our healthcare systems, they do the best they can with what they have. But when you don't have that, when you're searching out paper underwear and ill fitting clothing like I got, and paper booties for people to leave it doesn't make the nurses feel very good either. So they're really grateful that they have this to provide to their patients to offer
sure.
them a better service.
Yeah.
So we're
What?
really glad to be providing that. And so we took the trauma and we turned it into a positive, right? How else can we help people? How can we help the next person have a little bit of dignity and respect when they've gone through the worst day of their life?
Yeah, that's great and very important work. Now, what steps did you take to heal yourself from the trauma that you experienced so that you could honor it by doing this work?
Well, I went through a lot of counseling. I went through, a lot of personal destruction, because a lot of stuff happened and it was very public. It was very public. It was in the news internationally. In fact, the Maury Povich show called me and wanted me on there because it was that public at the time. And that was devastating, right?
Mm,
Like every time you start to feel like you're healing, something comes up. It's in the newspaper or whatever. And now, of course, there's social media, and I can't imagine how people go through that. I went through a lot of counseling. I worked very closely with my healthcare providers. My doctor was incredible, and she followed me very closely, gave me excellent service for me and my children. And I slowly started to change my life. I left working in social services. It was just too close to me. It was, I couldn't do that anymore. Um, because the bureaucracy was closing in, and I needed to help people in a more effective way. So I've taken a lot of courses, a lot of personal development, and I moved across the country and lived on 50 acres in the wood to hide from people. And
oh,
now I'm not hiding anymore. I'm good. My
it's time to
family
come
is
out.
really, really supportive. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a very inspiring story. Do you want to talk anything about the details or share with anybody about what happened?
Sure. I had well, basically, I grew up always being the scared, anxious child. And of course, when we grew up, it wasn't called anxiety. You were just shy, right? Speak up, shut up,
Mm,
whatever, right? My parents were wonderful. I'm not blaming them for anything. But I also grew up in a very strict religion. And so as soon as something devastating happened to me as a child, some abuse, I couldn't tell anybody because now I wasn't just a bad girl. God saw me badly too, right? My whole future, heavenly future was destroyed. And so I just really grew up feeling bullied and treated badly. And I felt like I was nothing and I was worthless and I wasn't even going to have an afterlife because I was already damaged goods. So when the first person who said, I love you and wanted to see me more than once after, you know, having some not great I couldn't even call my previous experiences relationships. I was just used a lot and treated badly. And I didn't see myself as having any more value, so it didn't matter. So anyways, I ended up with this person for a long time. After 15 years, I knew that I needed to leave him because he was no longer being hurtful to me, but he was starting to not hurt my children, but they were seeing and feeling it. Although, of course, my oldest had for a long time, and I thought I was protecting her. So, after trying to extricate myself and leave him properly, having a couple of restraining orders, the first time I had a restraining order and anybody knew anything was when he was strangling me in front of the children and holding me up against the wall. And I had to have my oldest, who was 8, take my 1-year-old and run out and hide. Broke my heart. I mean, my guilt for that is still very strong, even though I know forgiveness and self-love it. But that I let it go that long. I just didn't know anything else as much as I didn't. And so, leap ahead till my baby was just before her 3rd birthday. I, a couple weeks before, had my final restraining order after being stalked and harassed for months and reporting it to the police. And I thank the person who reported on my behalf because I still wouldn't have. I just let loose one day after he tried to drive me off the road with my baby in the car, right? And she's like, no, I'm reporting this. And she did. And I'm really, really glad because you get to, when you're victimized, where you think, you're like, I know this isn't normal behavior, but is it that bad? Or am I, because you're so gaslit and brainwashed. And between religious brainwashing as a child to society brainwashing that I was ugly and it didn't matter, to a man who took that and used that against me to keep me down. But he needed me. See, he couldn't let me go because I financially supported him in a good job. Anyways, this one morning, November 8th, 2004, I felt like I was okay. I was like, I can do this. I got my kids to school, drove them to school. I was starting a new business and I had gone to a quick meeting, had another one that morning. I walked in my front door, and I won't get too detailed, but I walked into my front door, locked the door, walked up the stairs when he jumped out at me with a butcher knife from my kitchen. And the next 3 hours, he proceeded to assault me in every manner, physically, emotionally, and sexually. And he was going to kill my children. But he just didn't know if he was going to do that with me watching or not. He wasn't quite sure, right?
Scary.
So he was never going back to jail because I'd put him in jail a couple of times and he wasn't going back. So I eventually, after he stole my car to go abduct my child, I managed to escape. I managed to literally untie, like, with my mouth and get the bind and gag. And it was very bad. And I was then taken to the hospital, but I was sat in a police car for over an hour, waiting to find out what happened to my child. And I was terrified she had died. And months later, I did find out that she had died. A police officer told me. He wasn't allowed to speak to me because of all the legal stuff that goes around it. And we kind of snuck a visit because I had to say thank you because he saved my baby and he saved myself and my older child. And he told me that when he saw her, she had been thrown from the car because she wasn't in a car seat because he had just threw her in the car because
He had a car accident.
Yes, he took her from her school, and the police were already, like, they arrived just after from my phone call. And as soon as he saw the police, he threw open the side of my minivan and he took my baby, who was the size of a 1.5-year-old when she was almost 3. She was so tiny, and he threw her in the car. And he jumped in the car, closed the door, and 57 seconds later, he was dead. And other people were injured. And my baby was thrown to the ground. It was so fast.
Mm.
And the police officer was there, and he said she was gone. He goes, I know when somebody doesn't have a pulse and they're not breathing. He's a police officer. And he goes, I knew I shouldn't shake her, but I did. He goes, I shook her shoulders and said, come back. And he said, and I get goosebumps. He just went, it was like, and she was back in her body. It's like you see in the movies. It was amazing. And and she told us that she could see her dad, but he was already dead. I didn't know that right away, but so there was a lot of like really amazing, miraculous stuff happen. And my baby did survive. She was very badly injured, and she has injuries to this day. But we're all good in
Yeah.
many ways, right? We're working on healing, and we're working on spreading love and acceptance. And my mission now is, of course, to help women and girls and people who have gone through this. But what about if we can help before it gets to that point? What
Yeah.
if we can work with teens and help them dispel those myths about themselves that they have, that I had, that because something bad happened to me, I'm worthless, that I can't tell anybody, that I can't reach out for help, because we tell them those things, but we don't give them the tools to do it. So
Right.
that
Yeah.
is my mission. And I know it's yours too, because
It
I've
is.
listened to your
It
podcast,
is.
and
Yes.
I was like, wow, Lori's there. We're on the right track. We're both reaching these goals together, because if we can help them with those tools then, and help them go, either prevent them from ever getting into that situation, or at least when they're starting to, that they go the red flags, right? These aren't okay.
Yeah.
If I have to hide from the people I love and can't tell them what's happening in my life, there's something wrong. And helping them with those tools. And so that's what I just think is incredibly important now. And so I appreciate that you're asking these questions, and I appreciate that you're reaching out and helping parents and teens with these relationships.
Well, and I trust that we're going to be doing some work together and helping families to heal from all this trauma and worry and stress and fear that's going on around us. And I think I had a similar background, and I was with an abusive partner as well. And I thought it wasn't that bad, because when I worked at Child Protective, I mean, women were getting beaten. They were having their teeth knocked out, and he was strangling me, and I wasn't having my teeth. I didn't have those kind of marks and stuff. It was different. And I didn't know. So it was 30 years. So, I mean, I definitely stayed too long, and I don't hang on to the guilt from that, even though I could, because, I really did what I knew. I did the best I could with what I knew at the time. I didn't know how. And that is why I'm so committed to helping people. And I'm very much a strong advocate against the systems that aren't working. They're not efficient. They're very disempowering, and they re-victimize people. So I'm with you on that level as well. So it's exciting. Well, I appreciate you coming and talking to us today and sharing your story. And I love how great it's turning out, right? Everything is turning out as exactly as it should. Many blessings as a result. And that's exciting. So thank
Yes,
you.
it is exciting. And yeah, and I think there's a lot of work to be done in that area. So I'm really glad to have this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Me too. Thank you. Good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for listening to this week's episode of Modern Lifekeeping with Lori Christine and Sarah Sherman, brought to you by Kira Kisses. For more information about Sarah, you can connect with her at youarenotyourstory.info or on Facebook under You Are Not Your Story. Remember, the power to heal from trauma is within each one of us. Embrace actions, choices, and/or strategies that will heal you instead of limit you. For more information on my individual and parenting soul strategy sessions, support groups, retreats, and services, you can visit Kira, Keara, kisses.com. Until we meet again, keep wondering.